officially thank you for joining us. Now we can start the cameras rolling because we're live streaming. Conservative HQ is our main sponsor, and we want to thank them. And they are live streaming today on the web, so we want to welcome all of our viewers by the web. We also, again, want to welcome you, the audience who've made no small sacrifice to come here on a beautiful Sunday afternoon to listen to the candidates. And the candidates, I have tremendous respect for people who run for public office. It is not easy. It costs money. It takes time from your families. And you're bearing the burden of these issues where others can go about their business and enjoy their lives. And so regardless of what happens here, gentlemen, I thank you for being willing to do that. We want to also thank our sponsors, because we have a lot of them. And as I call the sponsor names out, will you guys please stand so they can see who you are? Conservative HQ, our main sponsor, if you represent them, please stand. Hold your applause, please. Allen West Guardian Fund. American Family Association, I'm standing. ARC Network, Center for Security Policy. Citizens United. Eagle Forum. Family PAC Federal. Family Research Council Action. There's Connie back there. Freedom Works. GOH Conservative PAC. Gun Owners of America. Secure America now. I'm not going to argue with you then. You're a gun owner of America. I better be careful. Whatever time you say it is, I'll believe you. Smart Girl Politics. Star Parker. Tea Party Patriots. True the Vote. Voters Trust. Tea Party Patriots Citizen Fund. Thank you to everyone. And then, all right, let's give our hand to all those sponsors. Thank you. And then we have others that are supporters, and let me read their names, and if you'll stand, if you're representing them, it's Virginia Tea Party Patriots Federation, Prince William County Tea Party, Northern Virginia Tea Party, Fairfax Free Citizens, Virginians for Quality Health Care. Anybody? All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much for being our supporters. We have a lot of media here today. We're not exactly sure. We know that Breitbart is here today, represented by Carrie Pickett and Steve Bannon. Thank you, Breitbart, for all your coverage of this event. And at this time, I'd like to welcome the president of the Center for Security Policy, Frank Gaffney, who's going to lead us in the pledge. Will you please stand?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
All right, why don't you stay standing for a second, and let's just, we're going to pray. Some of you have from a different faith background. I understand that. I'm going to pray as a Christian, so let's bow our heads. Father, we thank you so much for the beauty of this day and for the fact that you remind us through nature and through all the blossoms that there is something that transcends all of our worries here. So, Lord, give us perspective, and we want to just recognize who you are and that you transcend all of this. Lord, give us wisdom and help us to decide who is the best candidate to replace Congressman Frank Wolf. Lord, thank you for this opportunity to gather, the freedom of it, and we want to thank you for that too. And all of this I pray in Jesus' name. All right, I'd like to introduce for you now the candidates who've come today. And from left to right, Barbara Comstock could not be here for a family commitment. Steve Hollingshead, Howie Lind, Bob Marshall, Mark Savitt, and Rob Wazinger. And those are our candidates. We are so lucky to have a special guest today. I know that many of you came because of him, and I don't blame you, because Chris Plant is a favorite of, I would maybe even gets to millions in the Washington, D.C. area. Chris joined... All right. Chris joined WMAL after 17 years at CNN, including nearly 10 years assigned to the Pentagon, covering the U.S. military and intelligence communities. That explains why you have so much knowledge about the planes and all those details, Chris. It's Wonderful. He was also a Pentagon correspondent, senior producer for national security affairs, military affairs producer. He traveled extensively for CNN covering defense-related stories from Saudi Arabia and Bosnia to Vietnam, Indonesia, Africa, and the remote corners of the former Soviet Union. Chris received the Edward R. Murrah Award for the Radio and Television News Directors Association for his reporting from the Pentagon during the terrorist attacks on September 11th of 2001. And most recently, Chris got a wonderful recognition from Talkers magazine, listed as one of the country's most popular talk hosts in the Heavy 100. And among those, you can imagine, are Rush Limbaugh, Mark Levin, and others. So Chris has now joined that. My understanding is that his ratings in D.C. have he's actually gone past Rush and some of the books. Now, and just a word, I've been doing radio for a number of years. I love talk radio. I don't think I've ever heard anyone who has more talent at talk radio, more knowledge, a better memory, a better ability to assess the facts, to correlate, to interact with callers. I'm amazed. Every day he hits the mark. And so we are so fortunate to have Chris as to share coffee with us every morning at 9, even if he doesn't know we're all there. And let's welcome a very big, warm welcome to Chris Plante.
Cut it out, you big nuts. Hey, guys. Hey, how are you? Hey, good to see you. Cut it out. Come on now. Yeah. No. Got enough troubles with the IRS as it is. Well, welcome all of you. Thanks for coming out and participating in our sacred democratic process. I know that everyone's going to learn more about the candidates here today, and hopefully the candidates are loaded and ready for bear. I have no doubt that they are. And I think the program here will move things along pretty quickly. A couple of the gentlemen up here I know personally, Bob and Howie, and the other guys I haven't met personally, but I'm not going to, it's not rigged or anything. So don't worry about any of that. And the format is we're going to start with an opening statement from each candidate. I'm going to try to keep everything to 1 minute. And that will be enforced by a person behind the curtain with a taser. So, just to keep things moving along.
That's Barbara.
And then we're going to begin the questions, and we're going to start on the far end. The first question will go to Steve Hollingshead. The same question will then be answered by the candidates down the line. The second question then goes to Howie Lind. The third question goes to Bob and continues to travel around that way, kind of clockwise, except they're in a straight line. But you get my drift, I think. And I'm going to have to wear my reading glasses for at least a portion of this. Otherwise, I might get a word wrong, and that could lead to a problem. We also wanted to welcome in the crowd a Democrat Party, what do they call them? Minders? Trackers. There's a Democrat Party tracker here in the crowd. We know who the person is. We wanted to welcome that person, not single them out.
Hiding under the chair back there in the.
And also just wanted to remind people in the audience that tonight, because of the format, we're not taking questions from members of the audience. So outbursts, and there's another report that there might be some kind of a troublemaker in the audience. Maybe throwing a shoe or something. Something like that.
My wife won't do that.
So Bob says his wife won't be here. So no spontaneous outbursts, please, from the audience, because there are also people in the audience with tasers. Not really. But it'd be fun if there were, wouldn't it? And with that, I believe that we're ready to go to the opening statements from the candidates. And as I said, we're going to begin at the far end, 1 minute opening statements, beginning with Steve Hollingshead. Steve.
Thank you for caring enough about our country's future to show up today. I'm Stephen Hollingshead. We are losing more and more of our freedoms every day, and that has weakened our economy, it has weakened us abroad, and it has made us afraid of our own government here at home. We don't need the government to solve our problems. We need the government to stop causing them. Now, how am I different from all the good folks up here and the one who's missing? I'm the only candidate in this race with broad business experience creating jobs and meeting payrolls. I'm the only candidate in this race who's ever reformed any government to the tune of $2 billion a year in welfare fraud we stopped at HUD. And I'm the only candidate in this race who's ever taught the Constitution of the United States. And if we want to get this country straightened out, we need to take this document across that river and stand up to the Washington establishment, stand up to the career politicians of both parties, and stand up to Barack Obama and tell them all, stop it.
And next up is Howie Lind.
Thank you, Chris, for moderating this event today. It's great. And thank you to Richard Viguerie, Conservative HQ, and all the other organizations sponsoring it. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Howie Lind. I'm going to dispense with my normal remarks that I've been giving for seems like forever now. I'm just going to cut right to the chase. There's two issues right now before this election on April 26th. Delegate Barbara Comstock supported Medicaid expansion. She voted for Barack Obama in 2008 in the primary. I did a radio ad this last week on the Medicaid expansion. They went apoplectic over it, of course, against me personally, but they took it off their website, and now the debate rages. She voted in the 2008 primary for Barack Obama under Rush Limbaugh's Operation Chaos that was supposed to be for Hillary Clinton, not for Barack Obama, and it was 3 weeks before. He announced it 3 weeks after the Virginia primary. I put the question to you, out of these candidates up here, who is your conservative establishment to go against the conservative candidate to go against the establishment? I say that I am that candidate, and I'm asking for your vote on April 26th. Thank you.
And next up is Delegate Bob Marshall.
Chris, thank you very much. My first memory of politics is when I came home and after I finished writing for Sister, I think Imelda, I Will Not Talk in Class 100 times with taping the pencils together, I turned the television on and expected to see Howdy Doody. To my surprise, I saw some guy saying, "Objection, Mr. Chairman, objection." I thought, what was this? It turns out it was the Army McCarthy hearings. I actually got into this much more than Howdy Doody and Buffalo Bill. So, well, that was my first introduction. My second introduction was when I watched the Democrat convention in 1972. By the end of that, and I worked for Jack Kennedy in 1960. By the end of that convention, I was convinced not only was I not a Democrat, I was not on the planet with these same people. This party had left me. I found a home by reading Whittaker Chambers' book Witness and voting for and working for Ronald Reagan. Thank you.
And next up is Mark Savitt.
Well, Bob, I'm sorry to say I remember Howdy Doody a long time ago. My name is Mark Savitt. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I know it's a beautiful day outside, and it took a lot of effort to come here today. You know, we have an election in 2 weeks, just a little under 2 weeks, and we all know the problems that we're having in Washington. We've all sat in front of our television set and said, throw them all out. And the problem is that it's our fault, because we keep sending the same type of person back to Washington every 2 years across this country. What we need is term limits, number one. We need somebody who comes from Main Street. We need somebody like myself who's been a business owner for 30 years. I don't have any government experience, but I have Washington experience as the president of a trade association that has testified before Congress numerous times, defending small business, defending consumers. So I'm the only one on this panel that has not worked for the government, has not been in the legislature, and I think we need to break the mold and try something new. Thank you.
And next up is Rob Wasinger.
Thank you, Chris, and all of those in the audience. It's no surprise, at least not to my fellow candidates up here, that there's someone missing today. Barbara Comstock has skipped virtually all Tea Party and conservative events, and she hasn't been telling you the truth about who she is. Last week, as Howie mentioned, it was revealed that she voted for President Barack Obama during the 2008 primary. At the time, she explained it away, saying that it was part of Rush Limbaugh's Operation Chaos. The only problem with that explanation is it's not true. In reality, Rush Limbaugh's plan was to vote for Hillary, and he launched it after Virginia's primary. Comstock got both the intent and the date wrong in her cover-up to explain why she'd support one of the most liberal presidents in history. In the immortal words of Congressman Joe Wilson, "Barbara, you lie." She also hasn't been honest about her corporate lobby work, her support for elective abortions and Obamacare, and her advocacy for corporate kickbacks to her wealthy friends. We simply cannot afford to send a lobbyist to Congress. We need a real conservative, someone who is not afraid to tell the truth and fight the establishment. On April 26th, I'd like your vote.
This whole politics thing is rough, isn't it? All right, and the questions that we have tonight, Lana, we're not going to be able to cover every single issue under the sun in the time that we have available, but the questions that we have were submitted by constituents who signed up, who RSVP'd for the event, and were invited to write questions that they would like to have asked of the candidates. And so we selected questions from those submitted by constituents, and those are the questions that we have here. And again, your question may not be in here, but not every question could be asked. And the way that we're going to do this, once again, beginning with question number 1, is going to go to Stephen Hollingshead, and then we're going to move this way. Everyone will answer the same question. Try to keep it to a minute each, and there may be a follow-up if there's grumbling or anything like that. The first question comes from Chris in Gainesville, who asked that Republican leadership in the House of Representatives recently released a set of immigration principles that focus on significantly increasing legal immigration and granting legal status to illegal immigrants with a promise of future enforcement. Most Americans believe that enforcement should actually come first, and immigration levels should be reduced right now in light of job shortages and the real unemployment rate in America. Well, what do you support, starting with Stephen? What would you bring to Washington?
Well, the first thing that we need to do is stop illegal immigration. We need to enforce. There are plenty of laws on the books that are not being enforced. Another example of the president ignoring the fact that he doesn't get to make the law. That's Congress's job. It's a national security issue, not just an immigration issue. We need to close the border. This country was built by folks who came here legally, who followed the rules, who worked and paid taxes. And I have no problem with folks coming here legally. That's a great thing. That's an asset. But they need to come here legally. We also need to dry up the incentive for people to come here illegally in terms of the welfare state, getting illegal aliens using social services and so forth. We need to stop that and dry up that incentive. That'll help us. But we also do need to close the border.
And Howie Lind.
Let me just, before I get to illegal immigration, I'm just going to follow up real quick on the opening statements. I've known Barbara Comstock a long time. This is not about personal or friendships. Our country is broken, and establishments in Washington, the establishment Republicans, are enabling Barack Obama to continue to break our country. That's why I'm running for this seat. Illegal immigration. Secure the border. We've got to do that. The broken visa system. 40% of illegals in this country are running around with expired visas. We don't have a tracking system for visas. It's just terrible. Back to the House of Representatives. Speaker John Boehner, Eric Cantor, and others are trying to ramrod through this amnesty bill with 198 Pelosi Democrats. No, that's not what we want as our leaders in Washington. So again, taking a stand so that our leaders can take a stand in Washington to fight back, not just that, Obamacare, the military cuts, all those, but illegal immigration. I'm to do with cutting it back and having a humane solution for what to do with the illegals here, but we got to stop the illegal inflow first. Thank you.
And Delegate Bob Marshall.
We have a 1,950-mile border with Mexico. Congress promised a number of years ago to put a wall, just like the Israelis did, to protect themselves from terrorist attacks. They have not finished that wall. They have just done everything except do the work. I wrote all 4 border state governors from California to Texas, urging them to set up nonprofit entities to build the wall themselves. Didn't get anywhere, but if I were a congressman, I would put an amendment on one of the budgets to say you can build the wall to engineering standards to keep illegal immigrants out of the United States. I would also put a budget amendment on telling Barack Obama, if you don't enforce the law, we're cutting money for your executive office, we're cutting money for every one of the agencies that you would be using to fund these projects. He obviously doesn't need the money if he doesn't want to enforce the law. You've got to get him to spend the money that Congress says for the purpose that Congress says to spend it. The Democrats in 1974 compelled Richard Nixon, 72, compelled Richard Nixon to spend the money that they appropriated, called the Budget Impoundment and Control Act.
And Mark Savitt.
Obviously, the very first thing we need to do is to secure the borders, not just somebody coming across the border for a better life, but because of terrorists that can very easily come across our border with weapons of mass destruction. And so no one misunderstands. I am completely against amnesty, no to amnesty. In 1986, when President Reagan was in office, we gave amnesty to 3 million illegal aliens, and at that time, we said no more. We are a nation of laws. No more means no more. We also need to reduce the number of legal immigrants coming into this country because they take jobs away from the people that are already here. Right now, we're roughly 1 million a year coming in. We need to reduce that to somewhere around 250,000 until we can get things under control. Thank you.
And Rob Wasinger.
Let me tell you a quick story. When I worked in the Senate for conservative hero Sam Brownback, I worked very closely with Sandy and Connie Mackey, who's here, on a woman that was up for the head of consular affairs at the State Department. Maura Hardy was her name. And at the time, this was about a year after 9/11, and she wanted to run the visa program for the United States of America. And we asked her a question. We said, Maura, what happened on 9/11? How did they get in? What was wrong with the visas? And she admitted to us that she hadn't even reviewed what happened that day, what happened with the visas. And I can tell you, if that doesn't tell you the whole system's broken, I don't know what does. Our whole system needs to be revamped. The visa program, we need to lock down the border, make sure it's secure. We can't grant amnesty to people that have gotten here illegally. We are a country of laws, and we need to respect the rule of law. Thank you.
All right, and the next question, and this one goes first to Howie Lind, and we will come this way and end up back with Stephen Hollinghead at the end of this round. This question comes from Mark in Gainesville. It's like a radio show. It's Mark in Gainesville.
Not me.
Who asks, are you willing to commit unambiguously to rebuilding the strength of our military? I'm guessing he might be a veteran or perhaps active duty. And while on the topic of national security, the self-declared mission of the Muslim Brotherhood is, quote, destroying Western civilization from within and within the United States. In pursuing this goal, it, the Muslim Brotherhood, promotes the supremacist Islamic doctrine of Sharia law through various front groups and mosques, including some that are in this very congressional district. If elected to Congress, what are you going to do about it?
Great question. I'm the only military veteran in this race, so military, national defense, foreign policy are very strong issues for me. We are in a very weakened state right now in our country. We are basically spectators on the world stage, as I call it. We're just watching things happen. We have no influence anywhere. So yes, rebuilding the military, national defense. I will hope to be on the Armed Services Committee to do just that. The Islamic threat. Frank Gaffney, Stephen Coughlin, Diana West were at my house a year ago in McLean on a specific topic of Sharia law. Open it up to just send a bunch of emails out and pack the house with a lot of you were here at that time listening to this huge threat that is undergoing within our country right now. We have a huge Islamic threat within our borders. It needs to be taken care of. So I will, yes, be on top of the national security, foreign policy, and Islamic threat. Thank you.
Delegate Bob Marshall.
As a state legislator, I introduced a bill basically along the lines of American law for American courts, in that the legislature would be in charge of what foreign law would be accepted. Nobody else. We have contracts. If you want to have a contract according to Iranian law, let the legislature decide who's going to do that, not an unelected judge who decides to make policy on their own. We have been pursuing policies since the Clinton administration where we intervene in civil wars and set up people, as we did in Kosovo, to are not very friendly to us. You need to go back to 1380 when the Serbs were fighting the Turks, and look at also the Battle of the Ponto. This is a long-term proposition. This president is now funding al-Qaeda operatives in Syria. There needs to be a budget amendment to say, Mr. President, do not give aid and comfort to our enemies with this. Did he forget 9/11? We should not be arming people in this civil war.
And Mark Savitt.
National security inside this country and also outside this country for Americans that are abroad is our top priority. With all the problems that we have in this country today, this has to be our top priority. As to the Muslim Brotherhood and Sharia law, we've all heard news stories where fathers have killed their daughters because they've dishonored the family and so forth. This is absolutely absurd. This is the United States of America. We shouldn't even consider something like Sharia law in this country. I know there are some localities in this country that are considering it. They ought to be ashamed of themselves, and they ought to be stopped by all means possible. Thank you very much.
Rob Wazinger.
I'm the type of limited government Republican that thinks the government should build our roads and defend our country and get out of our lives. And that's what we need to get back to, is those basics. So I would support cutting a lot of government spending, a lot of the waste, and putting it back in defense. Defense and Homeland Security has been very flexible and agile since 9/11. They have protected us. We haven't had a repeat of 9/11 here. And that's something that's very important. So we need to keep modernizing our military and our defense system so that we're ready at any point in time. Obviously, we need to take on the threat of Islamic terrorism wherever and whenever it occurs, whether it's internationally or here at home. And I think a lot of the people in the defense and Homeland Security industry are doing exactly that. Thank you.
In this round, we start with Bob Marshall first.
No, actually, we missed Steve.
No, you missed.
He didn't go.
He made a pass.
I apologize. Came down here and I stopped.
He made a pass anyway.
I'm terribly sorry.
The question.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. Oops.
Of course, it's the case that that judges have no business importing foreign laws into their consideration in our courts. It's happened even before this was a problem. There's a problem with importing some French laws and so forth. So judges need not to do that. We need to fight terrorism, no question. We also need to do a better job of explaining the American way and the principles of freedom and limited government that made this country great in the first place, and to have people learn what to assimilate into the American way of life, learn what it means to be an American. And immigrants for generations have done that and have been proud of the American way. So we need to do a better job of reaching out and explaining the principles of Western civilization to our own new arrivals.
Can I go now? I'm sorry. This one goes to Bob Marshall to start with. And the question comes from Marion Fairfax, who asked about the removal of the Virginia Attorney General, as he has stated that he will not uphold the laws of Virginia concerning same-sex marriages. Do you support traditional marriage and other traditional values, such as the life issue? And do you think that private companies should have to, that is, to be forced to provide insurance that includes abortion-inducing chemicals, and so on? Do you think that state and federal taxes should be spent on abortion?
Way back, a friend of mine and I devised what became the Hyde Amendment. It passed. We've cut off federal funding of abortions. I did the same thing for Congressman Bob Dornan in the area of military, District of Columbia, and of foreign affairs. I have filed a bar complaint against Mark Herring for his perfidious disgusting treatment of the citizens of Virginia in not just refusing to uphold the Constitution of Virginia, but in attacking the Constitution of Virginia. He had no business doing this. He could not have read the decisions that he claims to have read, Loving versus Virginia, because it assumes marriage is only between one man and one woman. I've introduced legislation to block the federal government from compelling businesses and Little Sisters of the Poor from having to buy abortion pills. The one opponent who's not here today opposed me twice on those amendments. You should not force conscience. The First Amendment was made for conscience from James Madison. This is the state that originated this, but the gutless Republican leadership in Congress and in Richmond doesn't want to confront this. I do.
Mark 7.
It's funny that Bob got that question first.
I thought he was going to pass.
And you said this wasn't rigged, right?
Mary's my cousin.
Yeah, right. As far as our Attorney General, the Attorney General takes an oath of office to uphold the laws of this state and the Constitution. The Attorney General failed. The Attorney General may not like having to defend certain laws, but it doesn't matter. That's his job. It's like a defense attorney or a public defender who's asked to defend somebody who is been accused of murder. They may know that person's guilty of murder or believe it is, but they still have an obligation under the law to do their job, and he failed to do it, and he should be removed. As far as private companies providing funding for abortion and anything related to that, they shouldn't have to do that. I'm completely opposed to that. Thank you.
And on the question of life, you didn't really address the question of life, pro-life.
Oh, I'm definitely pro-life.
Okay. Do you think it's something that will become a legislative issue?
It's already, if you go to Roe versus Wade, which is 41 years ago, it's already been decided by the Supreme Court, and I think what would have to happen in order for that to change is we're going to have a very strong majority in the United States Senate, to have the House of Representatives, and also the White House. But if you look back during the Bush administration, we had that, and we failed to take action at that time. Yeah. I think it was a missed opportunity.
And it would also require likely another court challenge that would bring it to the Supreme Court as well. Rob Wasinger.
Thank you. I'm 100% pro-life, and I think it's an absolute crime that anybody's money, state, federal, local tax revenue, would ever be used to fund an abortion. So I completely oppose the use of tax dollars for abortion. When I worked in the Senate with Brandback, we put together the Human Cloning Prohibition Act, which became model legislation all across the country to stop therapeutic cloning, as proponents of cloning called it, and also to stop embryonic stem cell research. And we opposed the Bush administration because on August 9th, they made a decision that would compel us to use our tax money to pay for destructive human embryonic research at the National Institutes of Health. That decision was wrong, and I think what we're looking for in our next congressman is someone that's going to fight the administration, Republican or Democrat, fight the establishment, and do the right thing regardless of the consequences. We need strong leadership. Thank you.
And Rob, on the question of the Virginia Attorney General.
I think the Virginia Attorney General has been an absolute disgrace. He has an oath of office that he needs to uphold. Marriage is between a man and a woman. I think that's very straightforward and obvious. And I think his actions have been disgraceful.
Stephen.
I agree with everyone up here that Mark Herring needs to be removed. A man who can't keep his oath for 3 weeks.
2 weeks.
Oh, 2 weeks. I'm sorry, Bob. I stand corrected. I stand corrected, Bob. But, the notion that I do want to, Mrs. Comstock's not here to answer for herself. I do want to point out one lack of judgment on this abortion thing where she cast the only vote in 2013 that the National Abortion Rights Action League wanted, and so she got 100% on their scorecard for the year 2013, which was to leave abortion coverage in Virginia's Obamacare exchange. That was a grievous lack of judgment on her part. look, we shouldn't, whatever happened to live and let live in America anyway? All this, we're making nuns pay for birth control coverage? Seriously? Right. I mean, why don't we just let people buy their own stuff instead of forcing everybody to pay for Sandra Fluke's contraceptive? I'd be happy to follow up on the issue of life, if you like. I have 6 daughters and 7 sons, many of whom are here. So I don't think that there's... Wow. My lovely wife is right there. You can wave, Jan. She's the mother of 13. I don't think there's anybody who understands how precious every human life is than my wife and me. Thanks.
Wow. Beat that.
Yeah.
Well, I only have 11.
Not even Wassinger can catch up. Keep trying, Rob. Keep trying.
Howie, this comes up a lot, numbers of kids. All right. I've only got 4. They're grown, but I have 2 beautiful little granddaughters, but we'll let Rob talk about his. No, I'm pro-life, all the way, 100% pro-life, strongly traditional marriage between a man and a woman. Mark Herring should be impeached. I mean, that's outrageous to have right after he's sworn in that he did what he did. You know what he did. Since we're talking Attorney General, let's talk for a minute about Eric Holder, okay? Because that's another person that should be impeached. That is just egregious what's going on in this country now. You probably saw it this morning. The last couple of days, these IRS finally they're getting some steam behind having some hearings or locking up Lois Lerner or others that should be locked up for this IRS catastrophe. but there's Benghazi, there's Fast and Furious, there's other scandals, the NSA that need to be looked into. Nothing's happening. Eric Holder should go. Thank you.
I think Howie covered everything. We're ready to go home, right?
The next question we begin with you, Mark 7. To make sure I want to pause there, make sure I know you guys will keep me honest, I'm sure. And this one comes from Bob in Percival. That's not you, Bob, right?
No.
Okay.
He has
right now, he's Bob in Percival. Well, I am Bob in Percival right now.
He has a dual address.
And Bob asked, you may remember a certain Texas governor at a presidential debate said that he had 3 governmental departments and agencies that he wanted to do away with, but he can only remember 2 of them. What 3 governmental departments or agencies would you hope to eliminate if the opportunity presents itself? Will you support a bill to do so, to eliminate government agencies? And how else would you significantly cut federal spending given the debt crisis, now at $17.5+ trillion?
Well, can we get rid of the executive branch? That's the first place that I would go. 3 federal agencies. HUD would be the first one, Energy would be the second one, and Education would be the third one. As far as where to cut additional spending, this country sends billions and billions of dollars a year to foreign countries that hate us and wish to do us harm. And what we need to do is stop, take care of ourselves first, protect our allies. But as far as those other countries, take Afghanistan as a perfect example. President Karzai over there has put billions of dollars into his pocket. And this needs to stop, and we can save a lot of money by doing that. Thank you.
And Rob Wassinger.
Yeah, I have kind of 4 targets: commerce, energy, education, of course, and also housing and urban development. All of these agencies have become wasteful. There's a lot of corporate kickbacks. They're screwing up our education system. And I definitely support a bill to eliminate those. And we do need to go further. Looking at government spending, there's a program NASA runs. It costs $300,000 a year. It's called the Green Ninja. It's a little YouTube video of this little green ninja that goes and teaches school children about global warming. which is absurd. I mean, you can't even make this stuff up. And, we always think it's the Democrats that go out and support this garbage. But the fact of the matter is, it's establishment Republicans supporting this garbage. They're all in it together. There's no difference between Democrats and Republicans in Washington, D.C., and we need to start fighting, and we need to start fighting now. We can't keep putting this fight off for another day. Thank you.
And Stephen Hollingshead.
Well, as a former educator, I think the best thing we can do for education in the United States is to eliminate the Department of Education. So that saves us $80 billion a year, but even more importantly, it prevents this whole idea of a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach with tassel-loafered bureaucrats on the Washington Mall running our education system. Education belongs to parents, and it belongs to local officials, if at all. I'll also give you a couple more. While we're dismantling Carter-era agencies, we could go right over to the Department of Energy. The little bits of it that need to be retained can go back to the Department of Defense where they came from. We can also, my former agency, sorry friends, but HUD needs to be eliminated as well, because this is a local issue. Nothing in the Constitution says that we need to be in housing at the federal level. So, but we do need to get back. We need to yank back on spending in every part of the government and make sure that the private sector grows faster than the government sector. Thank you.
Howie Lind.
I'll start off with the EPA I'll just steal the line from Ken Cuccinelli. Ken calls it the Employment Prevention Agency, but you can't, just cuts out jobs across the country. Department of Education, we've already mentioned that, but the Common Core, I mean, that's terrible. That's Obamacare for education. Do away with that. Right. IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, is a punitive political organization in this country. If it's fair tax, flat tax, make it a postcard, make it simple. We don't need that. Let me just, since we're on this about government agencies, the militarization of the non-defense federal agencies, it's terrible. Every single agency has their own little army. The Bureau of Land Management in Nevada has snipers. You just heard about that. Snipers, BLM, what? That's outrageous. All right, so cutting back, yes, we need to cut back. $17.5 trillion debt. John Boehner came in 4 years ago as Speaker. It was $14 trillion. Now it's gone up $3.5 trillion. Okay, John, time to go. Thank you.
And Delegate Bob Marshall.
It's easy to say that you have a goal that you want to drive somewhere, but how do you get there if you don't have a car, you don't have a bike, you don't even have a rickshaw? Well, the only bills that you're going to really deal with on a practical level are the appropriations bills. A bill cutting DOE is not going to get out of committee, but every year they've got to vote the appropriations bills. What I would do is as follows. In 2007, spending at the federal level was $2.73 trillion. Revenue this year is $2.8 trillion. Every appropriation bill I would take and match now the spending that was back in 2007. Every time I do that, I would hope to get a vote on these spending cuts so you can see who is serious about this. I go to undermine the assumptions of my enemy. I'm suing right now the University of Virginia for the papers of Michael Mann, who's the godfather of this stupid global warming and this cap on all carbon-based energy. And I would put an amendment on NSA to say, no spying, or Mr. Clapper, get a job that you work for.
All right, and the next question, we start with Rob Wasinger. And the question comes from Laverne in Lovettsville. I wonder if any of the people that put the questions in are here.
Don't call me Shirley.
This one is not too tough, I think. Will you support the Constitution and the separation of powers, which the current person living in the White House refuses to acknowledge? And what would you do as a member of Congress to combat the abuse of power that we see in so many different forms these days, such as the IRS targeting of the president's political enemies?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to restore the separation of powers. This president has abused it like no other president before. Even when it comes to his own signature legislation, Obamacare, whenever he doesn't like the end dates, he simply moves them, usually for political realities. Democrats are running scared on the issue of Obamacare, and they don't want to have to face it in the midterm this year. So he just keeps pushing the deadlines back so that most of the impact comes after the elections. These things, he can't just unilaterally decide what the law is going to be and then disregard everything else. Another thing is with DOJ and Defensive Marriage Act. He decided he wasn't going to enforce that. That's not his decision to make. Congress makes the laws, and he's on the enforcement side. He can't just willy-nilly get rid of the laws. So restoring that, I think, has got to be the first priority of Congress. It's the thing we need to do first to get our government and our Constitution back to where it needs to be. Thank you.
Wait a minute, he can't just make laws on his own?
Shocking.
I think that's an app on his telephone.
Yeah, he's got a pen and a telephone. Next is Stephen Hollingshead.
Well, I need to admit something I have in common with President Obama. Both of us used to teach the Constitution of the United States. But the difference is I read it first. You don't have to get very far, Mr. President. Get through that beautiful preamble and get right to Article 1, Section 1. All legislative power herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. Doesn't say a word about a phone or a pen or not waiting for Congress. Now, members of the House have standing to sue and need to do so when the President takes away their constitutional powers under the Constitution. I mean, it's right there, right? The Congress makes the law. When the President uses his phone and his pen and makes the law, he needs to be sued in court. We need to pass legislation that overrides his executive orders, like the one that says the Homeland Security needs to keep track of where your car has been.
Howie Lind.
I talk about this race a lot. This is a great segue into what really is at play in this race now. We are missing one here, of course, but this isn't a popularity contest. This is serious, deadly business that we're talking about and what our Congress and our White House are doing. It's deadly business. Obamacare. If we don't take a stand and stop Obamacare, death panels will be in place, Americans will die. If we don't take a stand against the massive defense cuts in the military, our military, when called into action, will be outgunned, Americans will die. If we don't take a stand for securing the southern border, we'll continue to have lawlessness down there and Americans will die. Impeachment. I get that question all the time. We get the question about this president and others all the time. It's lawlessness. This White House has been engaging in lawlessness for all this time. The question from Chris about stripping away Obamacare, that's just the latest example. NSA, there is a lawsuit, Stephen mentioned. It's called the NSA. Senator Rand Paul, with Ken Cuccinelli's help, they are suing the federal government over the NSA spying right now.
Delegate Bob Marshall.
This past summer, I reread Elliott's debates. What's that? That's the record of all the debates in the states where the Constitution was being ratified. Rhode Island wasn't in there because they never attended the convention. When you go back and look at the real powers that we are supposed to have, they don't have some of these powers. I talked to Eric Cantor for about 20 minutes, telling him, you have the power to completely cut the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court in these problem areas of sex and marriage. He never heard of it. I had to point out a big book in his office to do that. I talked to his staff for 20 minutes, telling his staff, the only people that can sue on Obamacare now are the members of the House of Representatives because all revenue bills must start in the House. The tax started in the Senate on a tax credit bill. It is not constitutional. He needs to go back and read the Constitution and obey it. You have got to have people who are grounded in this, who are willing to get in fights and don't care who you're fighting, including your own leadership.
And Mark Savitt.
I just love playing cleanup. John Boehner does have standing to stop the President of the United States. The only recourse here is through our courts. And if the members of the House of Representatives won't do it, then as American citizens, we need to contact our congressmen and tell them that they need to get Mr. Boehner to do this. If not, that they will be removed from office. We need to contact Mr. Boehner ourselves and tell them that. We need a new American revolution in this country because we are losing. You can clap, that's fine. This country, I'm 59 years old. This country is not what it was when I was younger, and it's not going to be what it should be when my 5 grandchildren reach age. We need to stop this president, this administration right now. You know, Barack Obama thinks that the 3 branches of government are the executive branch, Eric Holder, and the Congressional Country Club. And as I said, we have to take our own initiative and go after this by contacting the Speaker of the House. Thank you.
You know, there is Stephen Hollingshead mentioned teaching the Constitution like Barack Obama, but first reading it unlike Barack Obama. There is a photograph that's actually from Barack Obama's own campaign website from 2007, showing him in front of a blackboard at the University of Illinois, Chicago, teaching the Constitution. But if you look at the chalkboard, this is on his own website, he's diagramming rules for radicals in what is supposed to be a constitutional law class.
Well, he's just teaching people how to subvert the Constitution.
Well, right. Yeah, there are different ways to teach the Constitution.
I think he did that in Bill Ayer's living room, actually.
Well, he launched his political career that day, a little coffee with the terrorists. And this question we begin with Stephen Hollingshead. And the question is a pretty straightforward one. What differentiates you from the other candidates vying for the Republican nomination here?
That's a good question, Chris. I'm the only candidate in this race with broad business experience. My dad started with a machine shop, and he and Mom built a company that sells products all over the world. Like my dad, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been in manufacturing, food distribution, management consulting. I'm on the board of a financial services firm that does business in more than 3,000 communities across the United States. So that's one thing. The other, I mentioned before, I'm the only person who's ever gone and reformed any government. President Bush made me Deputy Assistant Secretary for Enforcement, Senior Advisor to 3 HUD secretaries. I ran the President's management agenda for HUD, and we found and we stopped $2 billion a year in welfare fraud that was going on at HUD. And the third thing I've mentioned a couple of times, thank you, third thing I've mentioned a couple of times is that I used to teach the Constitution of the United States for my day job, and this is the guidebook that we need. Not even the big book in it's almost Eric Holder, but Eric Cantor's office. But this little book, what Bob was mentioning is in Article 3, Section 2 of this little book. This is what we need. And this is, so I think those three things distinguish me. Thanks.
Right. Howie Lind?
I feel my background and experiences from my professional life uniquely qualify me for this office for the times we live in right now. I was honored to have served as a naval officer for 20 years, leading young men and women around the world on difficult and demanding missions, later serving as your 10th Congressional District Chairman and your representative on the Republican State Central Committee. I've been fighting for conservatism across Virginia for many, many years. Not the establishment, not the Washington, D.C., which our candidate at the end who's not here will take to Washington to be part of the establishment. So I ask you, and back to the final point here, I've stood up, I'm standing up within our party with leadership in Washington to say, buck up, get a backbone, and stop Obama from destroying our country. That's the key, and that's why I think, for me, for this race now, I'm qualified, and I ask for your vote again on April 26th to be the non-establishment conservative who can win the nomination and win in November. Thank you.
Bob Marshall.
Well, I'd like to think it's my humility and charm, but I won't press that point. I'm the only person in Northern Virginia who was a state official who sued Governor Tim Kaine, Speaker Republican Bill Howell, Republican Attorney General Bob McDonnell, raised $100,000, challenged them in court because they set up a law that allowed unelected people to tax you up here and in Tidewater. They thought I was Don Quixote. They didn't think I was Don Quixote after I won 7-0. The Speaker of the House They thought I was something else I won't tell you, but the Speaker of the House wanted me to change the rules to provide for secret votes in subcommittees. I refused. He stripped me of 16 years in seniority. He took me off the vice chairmanship of one committee and 2 chairmanships of other committees. I'd say I'll do it again in Washington. Number 1, 3, I have been tested. I've never voted for a tax increase. I had my house picketed by gay rights people. I'm not buckling on any of these moral issues, period.
Mark Savitt.
We need somebody in Washington who's going to stand up not only to the President of the United States, but as someone else said, to our own party. We need somebody who is going to, well, let me tell you what I've been doing. I have been doing just this for the past 15 years. Besides being a Main Street business owner, I have been the president, as I mentioned before, of a national association that protects small business. I don't get paid for that. And also consumers. I have gone up against the likes of Barney Frank, Chris Dodd, Maxine Waters, Chuck Schumer, all the folks up here that are talking about this is what they'll do when they get to Washington. I have been doing this in Washington. I bring unique experience from the private sector and not from government, but from the Washington sector. Somebody who's been in there defending you for 15 years. I don't have to practice what I would do as a congressman. I've already been doing a similar job all this time. Thank you.
Rob Wasinger.
Again, I have a long history of fighting for conservative causes against the establishment, against the Democrats. It really doesn't matter. During my time with Sam Brownback, we decided to challenge the Bush administration, and they needed to be challenged a lot, on the nomination of Harriet Miers to the Supreme Court. She would have been an absolute disaster, another David Souter in the making. And in return for that, we got Samuel Alito. And I just finished up a stint on Capitol Hill with Congressman Kerry Bentivolio. And when Paul Ryan and Patty Murray got together and decided to sell us out on the budget and get rid of sequestration and increase spending or money, we stood up against it and voted no. We've got to vote no on these debt ceilings when they come up. At the beginning of the Bush administration, it was 55%. Now it's over 100%. The most important thing is we need to have somebody with the courage to fight against the administration, to fight against the Democrats, the Republicans, and do the right thing, regardless of the consequences. And I'm that person. I'd love your vote on the 26th. Thank you.
All right, this one begins with Howie Lind. This question is, do you support or oppose, and it kind of came up a little bit in passing earlier, do you support or oppose the continued efforts through the Department of Education to nationalize the American educational system, most recently through the Common Core State Standards Initiative? If so, either way, will you vote to cut off federal funding for national curriculum testing and the trade organizations that promote these initiatives, including federal efforts to collect cradle-to-grave data on American children?
Yes.
Delegate Bob Marshall. Just kidding.
Yeah, long question. I mean, yes to all that. I mean, Common Core, it's so bad. Raise your hand if you've heard of Common Core. All right, that's great. A lot of people in this country, they don't know what it is, but you all know. We know. It's terrible. It's being pushed by this huge bureaucracy in Washington, the Department of Education, to go out to every schoolhouse in America to dictate what to do. It truly is Obamacare for education. Should be done away with. Yes, indeed, I'll vote against that. As far as the unions, yes, indeed, I'll vote to whatever you said. that too. But back to the personal aspect of this. I have 4 grown daughters. 3 of them are in education. I mean, it's not. This is not. We're not an education. We're not an anti-education party. I'm not anti-education. It's to the states. Federal government should stay out of it. Leave it to the states and local towns and cities. Thank you.
Delegate Bob Marshall.
Parents are the first educators. Any authority of anybody to educate, no matter who it is, in a private school or a public school in the state, receives that authority, that delegation from the parents. No one else. It's not a bureaucracy. It is your responsibility. It is you who are accountable. You really shouldn't be doing this. This is not training for critical faculties of thinking. It is propaganda for a worldview that is alien to the fundamental presuppositions of the United States Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And if you didn't have Washington meddling in these areas, you wouldn't have to worry about this. You got to let me tell you what I did one time when Roe versus Wade. When the Hyde Amendment was being challenged, I went downstairs to draw up an amendment to tell the clerk we're cutting off all the funding for all the clerks of the Supreme Court justices except one, because they're meddling too much. He says, "Is your boss serious?" I said, "You better believe he's serious. We're going to do it. We're going to work for you and cut out these people because the power of the purse is the most volatile, effective power we have in Washington."
Mark Savitt.
Let me start by saying yes to everything and then elaborate here. This is an easy question. The problem with our education system in this country is called Washington, D.C. As I said before, the Department of Education needs to go. Standards of learning tests. My daughter is a teacher, and I hear this from her and a lot of other teachers all over the district. Teachers today do not teach the subject matter. They teach how to pass the test, and that is the problem. And this is destroying the future of this country. Our teachers are training the next generation, and we're not giving them the right tools how to do it. If we don't change this thing and change it quickly, we're going to be in a worse position than we are today. So that's going to be a top priority when I get to Congress. Thank you.
Rob Wasinger.
Thank you. I absolutely oppose Common Core. I oppose No Child Left Behind. And like I think most people up here agree, the Department of Education should be eliminated. Our children some are in school, some are homeschooled. And it's very true that parents are the first educators of children. And that's such a vital, fundamental right of parents that we need to have restored. And it's getting trampled on by our federal government, in some cases by our state government. So getting all of those decisions down to the lowest possible unit of government is what we need to do to ultimately solve these problems and protect the rights of parents to homeschool. There's a real assault on homeschoolers all across this country. And that's something that we've got to stand up and make sure we're protecting those rights. Thank you.
Stephen Hollingshead.
Well, as an educational entrepreneur, I have worked with students of all ages. I think I might have mentioned I also taught the Constitution at the university level. So education is very, very important in my home, and we homeschool our children because the parents. Bob is right that parents are the first educators of their children, and even when you run a school, as I once did, the parents are in charge, and you have some technical expertise, one hopes, that you can lend to the enterprise. But the best thing we can do for education is to get rid of the Department of Education, not because there aren't some wonderful people working there. I've never met any, but I'm sure there are. but we need to give them a way to transition out. And get back to the local level, because the closer education is to parents, the better it is for children.
Of course, in your family, when you're homeschooling, you're actually running a school.
Well, yes.
They got school buses and everything.
And a hotel, and a restaurant. My wife is the COO.
You must be. And this one we start with Bob Marshall. The question comes from Margaret in Winchester, who asks, Obamacare is now showing itself for the destructive force that it really is in this country. Do you believe it can be fixed, in quotation marks, with amendments and changes and so on, or do you believe that it should be voted out of existence and reasonable legislation, such as tort reform, should be used to replace?
Well, we fix dogs, but I don't know. There have been 40 votes to rescind Obamacare, but none that are really serious in at least pulling some of these things out piece by piece. You know, there's a parable in the New Testament. Once the weeds and the wheat grow, it gets harder and harder to pull this out. You got to have an alternative. I put an alternative in this year, which the incoming president of the Medical Society of Virginia found very appealing. And what I said was, if a doctor gives community service and takes care of indigent patients, the Attorney General will defend that doctor in a lawsuit. This would push medicine back to where it was in the early 1950s, when the Hippocratic Oath prevailed and the cure, not the destruction of individuals or the erection or establishment of agencies, was the goal. We have to do this. I have fought Medicaid expansion. I'm not for it even if you reform it like my opponent is. We need to get back to non-governmental answers.
Mark Savitt.
You scared me for a minute. You talk about fixing Obamacare. Obamacare, I think the fix was in when they passed this thing, but it was only passed by the Democrats. Obamacare needs to go. You can't repair something that's a disaster. Okay, you have to knock it down, you have to destroy it and rebuild. And what we need to do is have our health care replaced by the free market society. You know, before Obamacare, we had individual insurance. You couldn't go outside your state. So competition was limited. If you open up the borders, and they can do that, they're Congress, open up the borders where you have competition all across the country, you're going to have reduced prices. People can pick what type of insurance, a la carte, so to speak, they want, which can keep their prices down, keep their deductibles down, because this is nothing but a disaster on this country, not just for health care, but also for jobs, because your employers are going to be knocking down the hours from 40 hours, maybe some overtime each week, to 29 hours a week. And when they do that, people aren't going to be able to pay for their mortgage, their car payments. We're going to have a worse economic crisis than we had before. Thank you.
Rob Wasinger.
Thank you. Obamacare simply cannot be fixed. It's got to be yanked up by the roots. It's got to be repealed. You know, out there on the road, this is the thing we hear the most. It's crushing small businesses. And when they announced that they had 7 million signups on healthcare.gov, it's not that we've got 7 million people that were uninsured that now have it. No, they displaced 7 million people that were already insured. So they're fixing a problem they're creating. It's got to be repealed, absolutely. And then we need to do things like tort reform. Maybe give medical savings accounts a better try. Something to connect the decision to seek health care with the costs associated with it. And I'd like to end by just pointing out one thing. Barbara Comstock, who is not here today, as we all know, voted to include elective abortions in the health care exchanges mandated under Obamacare in the state of Virginia. And that is something that we don't need in this race. Thank you.
Now, Rob, if I could just follow up with Rob for a second. You're a Hill guy. You've got legislative background. You know how these things work. What would it take to actually repeal the bill? I mean, as long as President Obama's in the White House, you can veto any bill that gets out of the House and the Senate. And if it's vetoed, it's sent back to the Hill. You'd have to have a veto-proof majority in both houses to actually repeal the legislation itself, right?
Right. Well, there is time. We have to win elections. I mean, that's honestly what we need to do. And we need to send people to Washington that are conservative and aren't going to go into the general election apologizing for being conservative and then flip when they get there. Repealing this means winning elections, and this year we're in a perfect position to do that. In the House, we can take back the Senate, and then we got to take back the White House. But the time to fight is now.
But what you're saying is that you've got to have the House, the Senate, and the White House to actually repeal it, to repeal it
absolutely.
As a piece of legislation. And I don't want to turn it into anarchy here, but Mark was raising his hand. I wanted to follow up a little bit to it.
Right. The Supreme Court had a missed opportunity here. They said that if you didn't have taxes, if you didn't pay for insurance, if you didn't have insurance, you had to pay a penalty. The Supreme Court classified this as a tax. So therefore, they felt as though they had the authority to rule on that. This bill, the Obamacare bill, the Affordable Care Act, originated in the Senate of the United States. Anything that is a tax has to originate in the House of Representatives. So it didn't do that. They should have thrown it out just for that right there.
Should have, certainly. And someone else who might have something to say about this, I believe, used to teach the Constitution.
I did, in fact.
Am I right about that? And there might be something in there in the Constitution that would pertain to this particular circumstance. Stephen Hollingshead.
There might, in fact. Can I go back and answer the original question first, and then?
Please.
I appreciate that. It's been really fun to watch the answers get better and better on this issue as the campaign goes by. Yes, we need to repeal Obamacare when we can, and we need to. There are two things we can do to replace it with private sector solutions. One is the Interstate Commerce Clause in the Constitution actually was intended to break down trade barriers between the states. And so we just pass a law. If you can sell it in Tulsa, you can sell it in Winchester. Second thing we can do is lawsuit reform, stop lawsuit abuse. defensive medicine, because doctors assign a bunch of tests they know full well you don't need, but they're preparing for their lawyers to be sued. That costs $58 billion a year to Medicare alone. So we can do those things to replace them. In the meantime, however, we know that Obama is going to veto any repeal of a bill with his name on it. And so we can defund it. We can defund the parts of the IRS, for example, that are enforcing the legislation.
I'm sorry. You said $58 billion a year in
$58
losses?
billion a year it costs. Medicare itself estimates that defensive medicine, that doctors are out assigning tests that they know aren't necessary, but that they know that they're only necessary to support their case in a court in the future. And so that raises, of course, the cost when you go to the doctor. And the huge cost of these lawsuits is, it's enormous. Michigan, many years ago, did an interesting reform with regard to auto insurance where they said, hey, there's no fault. People aren't trying to kill each other out there. So if you run into anybody, we're going to take care of the property damage, and you could put a limit on, even if some punitive damage, some small multiple of that. But no multi-million dollar case. And this brought down the cost of insurance substantially. If we did the same thing and said, look, these doctors aren't trying to kill you. And if they do something wrong, they have to pay actual damages, loss of work, whatever. But they're not trying to kill you, so no, $17 million lawsuits and so forth. That would bring down the cost of health insurance for everybody very significantly.
And of course,
not real good for Democrat donors like plaintiffs' lawyers.
And of course, the Democrats would be inclined to fight that hammer and sickle, as they say, because the trial lawyers, because the trial lawyers funnel their money almost exclusively to the Democrats. Bob, you want to jump in?
Well, since we're doing this, I was the one who...
Anarchy, see?
Right,
this was I was afraid of.
You did it.
Yeah,
That's right.
I know. It comes to you next.
I wrote the law that Ken Cuccinelli used to sue Barack Obama, so I was ahead of the game. Number two, the suggestion that I have for the Attorney General covering or backing up the lawsuits is what will reduce this defensive medicine. Look, doctors order extra tests, order consultations, not because they're medically necessary, only because they're fearful of a trial attorney. This is a backdoor way around the opposition of the trial attorneys. They're really going to have a hard case to say, are you against a doctor giving free care? You've got to put these people on the defensive instead of saying, well, you won't get the money. This is a way around that. It's a little jujitsu that we can avoid the trial lawyers. We need to use our smarts and not just force.
All right, and last one to weigh in on this is Howie Lind.
Okay, all right. I've been saying this throughout the whole campaign. Obamacare needs to be ripped out by its roots, the whole thing. Now, we have people that across the board have been saying, well, how do you do that? Just like you asked, Chris, how about reforming it, or, how do you repeal it? We are Americans. We know health care better than anyone in the world. Why would we ever put up with this unconstitutional abuse in our lives? All right, what to do afterwards? Dr. Ben Carson has great ideas on medical savings accounts. I subscribe to those. But Obamacare is coming to Virginia right now. It's called the Governor McAuliffe Obamacare Medicaid Expansion. And the one who's absent, yes, it was on her website for 1 year, and that's what I called her out on this week in the radio ad, and I got... Actually, it's an open letter on the internet. You may have seen it from Speaker Bill Howell trashing me, calling me a liar with 6 other delegates who you all know out there, not Bob, saying how terrible a person I am for doing this. No, it was on her website. They pulled it off that next day. And I voted against it before, I'm for it, all that stuff. That's what's going on in this case. Thank you.
John Kerry.
Well, Howie, is there a replacement? Is there...
we've talked about the replacement, free market reforms. Yeah. Lots of areas can be done to reinvigorate our health care.
And in terms of slapping it down between now and the end of President Obama's term, 2 years that one of you will be in the House of Representatives.
That's exactly.
One
of us. Yeah. It's and that's the other thing. I will, as your congressman, I will fight to obstruct, delay, defund, and repeal Obamacare. All that. I mean, there's things that can be done to stop it and slow it down before we get a Republican president there to truly rip it out.
Is it Is it killable at this point, or is this just...
You're provoking right now.
I know I am. I know I am.
And he's good at it.
I know I am. Everybody's getting a little bit of extra time on this one, I think. But is it really... is it killable?
If you listen to Barack Obama, oh, no, you can't
Right.
you can't do that. No, yes, it can be done. I mean, we can take this law out. Yes.
He's actually trying to kill it himself a little bit here and a little bit there.
Well, He's, sort of
So that
digit
should,
by
that should hold
digit.
us over until he's gone.
Remember when the president said that people would die? People would die if the employer mandate was extended when Republicans wanted to do it? He did it with his phone and his pen.
Yeah.
Has anybody died?
Yeah, and remember, it's not a death panel, it's a death board.
Oh,
Yeah.
It's the
Well, he needs to hang up his phone and take his pen and put it in his drawer.
It's
Put
the
it in his drawer.
Independent Payment Advisory Board that will decide when Grandma will die. So technically, they're telling the truth. I think the Washington Post wouldn't give many Pinocchios for that at all, because it's not a death panel, it's a death board. Important semantic differentiation. This question comes from Chad, Michael, and Jim. They ganged up and got together for this one. Want to know if, we start this time, I know, with you, right, Mark?
Did you get
Oh, no, I'm sorry, with Bob.
It's Bob.
Okay.
This time we start with Bob. I'll get it straight. Chad, Michael, and Jim want to know if you support Speaker John Boehner as the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and if not, then exactly who would you support as Speaker of the House of Representatives?
So this is from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
It is. It is.
Well, I probably don't have enough seniority to nominate myself.
But humble man that you are.
Yes. No, I have been, when I first announced that I was doing this, after we found we had enough people to make phone calls all around the district, the first thing I did was to say, Mr. Boehner has not taken the fight to Obama. He is ducking the fight. So I doubt that he would want me to be on any committees that would have any, thing to do. But no, I would not. I don't know why I would support him, because first of all, he probably won't want me there. So I don't know who I would support, but Mr. Boehner would be last on the list.
You don't know who you'd support, though,
I haven't talked to any. My wife and I went to a meeting at the Republican Club. There was a gentleman from South Carolina who I thought was very interesting to support. Nice hair.
Trey Gowdy.
Good hair is
Mr.
important
Gowdy,
in
right.
politics.
Yes,
Yeah.
Congressman Gowdy, right, yeah. Right.
Mark Savitt.
John Boehner's been there a lot longer than he should have already. He needs to go. He has let down not only his party, he has let down this country, and the longer he's there, the worse it's going to be for all of us. So that should be the first order of business when the new Congress is convened. As far as who would replace him, Eric Cantor is not the person. I think that's a given. That was a rhetorical question, by the way.
All right.
Trey Gowdy is, if you've watched him with the committee, the oversight committees, he used to be a prosecutor. This man is not afraid of anything. He has taken on Lois, the liar learner, and I think he would be my choice.
Rob Wassinger.
Thank you. It's a good question. I think it gets down to exactly what the decisions are that we're going to be making when we go vote on April 26th. We can stand with the establishment, or we can break with the establishment and join the conservative revolution. We've got great people all across the country. Rand Paul protecting our privacy, fighting the NSA. We've got Scott Walker taking on the unions who are bilking us out of all these tax dollars. We got Tom Coburn that's doing a great job. I think in the House, I definitely would not support Speaker Boehner. I think we've got a lot of great options out there. Trey Gowdy certainly one. I also like Congressman Mark Meadows from North Carolina. He's done a great job. I wouldn't even mind a rabble-rouser like Justin Amash. We need to get out there and join the revolution, and shaking it up a little bit in the House would be a good place to start.
All good names. Somebody said Louis Gohmert.
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't think it was one of his staffers. Stephen Hollingshead.
I think it's clear that we need some fresh leadership in the House. We're in this conversation, and you just listen to the magical thinking that goes on down there. Paul Ryan introduces a budget. Everybody attacks him for these huge cuts. That's lowering the rate of growth. Under the Ryan budget that's so horrible, well, gosh, 3.5% growth per year over the next 10 years. That's faster than the private sector is growing. Those aren't cuts at all. So I do think we need fresh leadership. There are some good rabble-rousers. All their names have been mentioned, although I think it's a great innovation to vote for people based on their hair. And Mr. Galley would be happy to...
It worked.
Hey, it worked. That's right. So, again, I'm not sure. We'd have to have that conversation and see what people will commit to do. And maybe we could have a test and see if they've read this book.
Going to hand some out.
I do that. I do that. Everybody who gives money to my campaign, I do send a little copy of this Constitution, so just bear that in mind.
Howie Lind.
Absolutely, John Boehner has to depart as Speaker of the House. There's many people that can lead in that job. I've always said throughout this campaign, leadership, either military or business or politics, if you're not leading, get out of the way and let someone else be the leader. There's just a few names that we've already mentioned: Louis Gohmert, Trey Gowdy, two good friends of mine, Joe Wilson, Steve King, both strong conservatives. Many people could lead. But let me go back to this name that we keep saying over and over again, John Boehner. I've been saying that name every night for the last 2 months, every time we're out anywhere, because of Benghazi. Our Congressman Frank Wolf has been leading this Congress in getting a special investigative committee on Benghazi. He has 189 signatures, 189 Republican signatures, but one man is stopping it from happening, John Boehner. Who knows why? I keep asking Frank, why? He doesn't know. All right, that's. I signed a letter recently with 100 and so other retired senior military officers to John Boehner demanding that a special investigative committee be set up for Benghazi. Still hasn't happened yet. Thank you.
All right, and the next one goes to Mark Savitt.
He starts first.
And I'm kind of, this is actually not on the list, but something I want to ask you. If you're elected to the United States Congress, what cause, what effort do you want to be known for?
I want to be known for standing up for my constituents, for representing my constituents, not representing special interests like we have too many of those in Congress now. I want to be known for somebody who voluntarily put a contract together with the constituents in his district to term limit himself, number one. Also, in that contract, I will retain my own health insurance policy and pay for it out of my own pocket because all of you do that. I want to be known as somebody that will not take special interest money, so there's no doubt who I actually represent, and that's the true meaning of the word representative.
Rob Wasinger.
Thanks. Every day when you go to Washington, D.C., there's always somebody giving you an excuse for why we shouldn't go fight. People on the House side, if you listen to House leadership, they say, well, we can't really fight right now because the Democrats have the Senate, so we need to compromise here. And let's say we win the Senate this year. You know what they're going to say? They're going to say, well, we've got the House and the Senate, but we don't have the White House, so we need to compromise. It's the first thing out of their mouth every single time there's an important issue up. And the time to fight is now. It's not when we have all three. The time to fight is right now. And an example of that is, at the beginning of the Bush administration, I mentioned this earlier, the debt ceiling stood at 55% of our GDP, and now it's over 100%. Are you kidding me? If now's not the time to fight, I don't know when it is. So that's what I'm going to do, is go there and fight to get our spending under control and fight right now. Not when we have the Senate, not when we have the White House, but right now. We've got to start fighting.
Brawler. You want to be known as a brawler.
That's right. I'm a brawler.
Oh, that's good.
Mud wrestling.
Mud wrestling. Stephen Hollingshead.
Well, I don't want to just be known as the guy who keeps upholding the copy of the Constitution. You know, the thing that really makes my blood boil is cronyism in all its forms. You know, the government cannot, this is the guy I want to be known as, the guy who says this over and over again. The government cannot give anything to anyone without first taking it from someone else. If you look at, and let me give you an example from right here in Virginia. A couple of my opponents, one of them who's not here tonight, Mrs. Comstock, has introduced, and she brags about it on her website. You can go to her website to get the bill number. Green energy tax credits in 2010. The same year, a wind farm authority, so that folks could go get those energy loans from the Department of Energy that Solyndra made famous, and Delegate Marshall voted for both bills. And she's passed a whole bunch of other special loopholes, exclusions, and exceptions for campaign donors and other folks. And that's why Virginia's tax on business is 46% above the national average, because you create a new constituency against tax reform, against the Reagan way of broadening the base and lowering the rate every time you do one of those special favors for special people. So I'm going to be the guy who stands up for the little guy, the people who can't afford to hire lobbyist Comstock, that's her day job, and, to fight for them. My dad started with a machine shop, and no lobbyist ever represented a machine shop anywhere. Thanks.
Howie Lind.
There's a lot to do in Congress, as we've been talking about for the last hour and 15 minutes or so. The massive spending and debt, we are mired in debt. We could be at financial collapse now. But what I want to be known for in Congress, restoring the morale of the military. No one even talks about that, really, anymore. I mean, people don't know about it. Here's what's going on in the United States military right now. If you're a general or an admiral or even a colonel or a Navy captain, and if you disagree with anything, it doesn't have to be politics, you disagree with anything that's coming down from on high, you're out, you're shown the door. But on the way to the door, you're told, and if you talk about this to anybody, you'll lose your security clearance. That means they can't work. They've spent their career of 30, 40 years in the military. What are they going to do? They're going to work as a defense consultant or something on the outside. It's terrible. It's Hitlerism. It's socialism. I mean, that makes my blood boil to even talk about that. And I'll get into one other topic in the last 10 seconds. This happened during the attack in Benghazi. A general and admiral said, no, we're protecting Americans. We're sending forces in. They were both fired on the spot. Thank you.
And the last word on this one goes to Delegate Bob Marshall.
If I get there, I would like to be known for leading the effort to return to the founders' vision. Every time I think of what to do, I ask myself, how does this affect my neighbor? Is it constitutional? Is it consistent with our fundamental principles? That's why I introduced a bill this year and got it passed, which says that none of you will be tracked in your cell phones or your computers unless there is a warrant issued, and it is directly relating to you, not these mass searches that the NSA is doing. I do not want military transfers to go to our enemies to give aid and comfort with technology. When you're in Richmond, you often have not the perfect in front of you, but the practical. Now, while I would vote for a fair tax or any other tax that it applies equally across the board, if the only tax cut you have there is a tax credit, I'll vote for it because that's the only thing you have. I opposed a $145 million subsidy to a bunch of Hollywood Democrats led by Michael Eisner, who wanted you to build his interchange for $145 million. He made $205 million that year. He could have had change. King's Dominion built their own interchange. Busch Gardens built it. You shouldn't subsidize corporations. You're the boss, not them.
Stephen, wanted to jump back in?
With all due respect, Bob, Ronald Reagan disagrees with you. You don't vote for a special tax deduction for special companies because that's the only chance you get, because you create a new constituency of people who now won't allow that tax reform to go through. And it's that cronyism. These bills, I'm not picking so much on Barbara because she was a sponsor, but they were unanimous going through. This is the normal thing in Richmond, these special deals for special people. And there was no Reagan to stand up and say, stop. There was nobody to say, hey, have you read Hayek? I mean, we have to realize the long-term implications of what we do. And if you start making special deals for special people, some of the same donors that Bob complains about Barbara having, like one who has $250 million invested in Barbara's district in a data center. It's a great business, but they don't deserve any more special help than anybody else, the machine shop owners, the flower shop owners, or the pizza shop owners. And by playing that game, you go right into that that process, and then they're lobbying against having tax reform because now they got 0%. Why would they be happy if everybody else's was lowered?
May I respond?
Yeah, and since Bob was picked on a little bit here, I'm just kidding. Get a minute to respond there.
Number one, Ronald Reagan did support a gas tax increase. I would remind you of that. Number two, I don't work for the mortgage electronic registration system, which is a private system created by the banks to avoid the accountability that we have with clerks for tracking all of the ownership of housing in the United States. The Supreme Court of Massachusetts severely criticized two of the banks who fund your organization for losing track completely of what is going on with who owns what property. Now, I'm telling you, when you only have one thing in front of you, you have to make a decision. This is the earth, not the New Jerusalem. If there is a tax credit, it doesn't go for a specific company, it goes for a class of people. If that's all you have, I'm going to vote for taxes, because in 23 years, I have never voted for one tax increase.
This is fun. This is fun. No, this is good. I'm glad we're actually having a conversation here. So we got Bob Marshall and the Supreme Court of Massachusetts against Stephen Hollingshead and Ronald Reagan. This is a very important issue, right? I mean, you don't even know the economic effects of the things that you voted for. Now, I understand that you didn't know, right? But we need somebody who can say cronyism is wrong in all its forms. You got to push for lowering the rate for everybody, broadening the base, and saying, just like Reagan said, 1986, his crowning domestic achievement was to get everybody together and say, all you special people have to give up your special deals, and we are going to lower the rate for everybody. And what happened? What happened was the economy boomed. We've been trying it the way you mentioned, Bob, and we have the highest tax in the industrialized world on business in the United States.
Were you threatened by the House of Delegates speaker with primary opponents? Because I have both times, and I told him to go to hell.
But let me address this business of who I work for.
It's good.
Hey, this is good. So that's the policy. That's the policy.
You guys want to argue next?
No, we're going out for a drink.
You're going out for a drink. Notify the affiliates we're running over. Actually, we do have to go on to the next phase, I think, and everybody else is getting squeezed out a little bit in terms of time. But you may have noticed that someone surreptitiously and very discreetly stood up a wireless microphone in the center aisle, thinking that since everyone until the last couple of minutes was so disciplined in the use of time, that we ended up with a couple of extra minutes, and we thought we'd offer the opportunity of a couple of people, perhaps in the audience, if you have a burning question that you feel hasn't been addressed, that you'd like to hear the future member of Congress, the candidates address. What is it that you would like to ask? We have a taker coming in from the back there.
Chris, if they could line up this way and keep their question to 1 minute and not make a speech, just ask a question.
No speeches, just questions.
You know what? Timekeeper, can you put your seat right here so they can see you? 1 minute. And if you could give your name and where you're from.
Okay. And who's
supposed to?
My name is.
What's the order?
Well, we left off last time, and now there's a little bit of an imbalance going on here. Bob, you got the first whack at the last question, correct? So it would go to Mark.
All right, first question.
Okay, my name is Rachel Sargent. I'm from Sterling, Virginia. My name is Rachel Sargent, and I'm from Sterling, Virginia. And my question is directed at Bob, but he can answer later. But what do you think of Grover Norquist and his alliances with the Muslim Brotherhood and how it has trickled down into our Virginia politics?
All right, and we start with Mark 7.
Well, of course, Grover Norquist is somebody I think we have to watch very closely. Frank Wolf, a couple of years ago, explained this in very eloquent form on the floor of the House of Representatives. I think he was also one of only 6 members of the House that did not sign his pledge to raise taxes under any conditions. I agree with Frank Wolf on that. I'm not saying that I would ever raise taxes, but, never say never, because you don't know if there's going to be some type of an economic disaster in this country or a military disaster in this country. And I think it's important that we not go up there without having an open mind. Again, I wouldn't raise taxes, but I think it's dangerous to have somebody, like, especially like Grover Norquist, that bullies people into signing an agreement. Our job is to represent the members of the district. We have to protect them no matter what it takes. So again, I wouldn't have signed that notice or that pledge.
What about his Muslim influences, the fact that he has meetings regularly with the Muslim Brotherhood?
Right, and there's a question as to where some of his funds go to fund some of these terrorist groups.
And that he's also sits on the board right here at Parental Rights, and it was told to me that it was an evangelical move as opposed to the fact that he also supports gay rights.
Right, and I agree that Frank Wolf said this is something that needs to be looked into, it needs to be investigated, and I agree with that 100%.
Rob Wasinger.
Thank you, Rachel. First, let me also thank you for all the great work you do for the pro-life movement in Virginia. You do a great job. We really appreciate that. I think, Grover's had past associations with Jack Abramoff and other people in various government scandals, I think, and Barbara. And I think some of this crony capitalism that is infiltrating the Republican Party really needs to be confronted head on. And I think some of the alliances that he's made in the past, the one you mentioned with the Brotherhood, is very, very troubling and deserves a lot of investigation. But there's other ones, too. And I think some of the work for the gay rights community is also very troubling. I think what we need here is a conservative that can go out in the general and articulate a strong conservative message and not apologize. But you raise a lot of good questions that need to be answered, I think. Thank you, Rachel.
Stephen Hollingshead.
Well, thank you for giving me a copy of Frank's new book. I've been a little busy the last week since you gave it to me and haven't read it yet. So I don't know enough about Grover's activities in that regard. I have told Grover that I can't sign his pledge, not quite for the reason that Mark mentions, but because it's not conservative enough. I had this conversation with him where I said, hey, no problem with the first half of the pledge, not raising taxes. I understand there's only 5 presidents ever who've ever cut taxes in the 101-year history of the income tax, and every single time it's been cut, revenues have dipped and then surged because the economy does better, it brings in more to the government. So there's no good reason to raise taxes. The problem is a little bit in the second part where he says you never do away with a deduction without getting a corresponding rate increase. Well, that's fine for big deductions where you can do that, but for a little deduction like say a solar panel deduction where you couldn't do that, I asked Grover, I said, would that violate your pledge? And he said, well, of course it would, but nobody would ever introduce such a bill. And I said, I'm running for Congress. I will.
Howie Lind.
Great question. The Muslim Brotherhood, they pose a grave threat to this nation. They're already in here. They're infiltrated across the government, across the country. There's a book called Infiltration years ago written. But yes, Frank Gaffney, your book is great on that, on Grover, all his shenanigans, all his connections. And I go back to what I said earlier about when Frank and Diana West and Steve Coughlin came to my home last year and spoke on Sharia law. It was a very great effort. Steve Coughlin, I don't know if he's here today or not. That's a case in point of what we're facing right now with this, exactly your question. Stephen was a defense, he's a naval officer, naval intel reserve officer, a defense contractor, was in the Pentagon talking about this stuff. He was basically thrown out, literally thrown out, and his security clearance was taken away, just like I spoke of earlier. This is terrible. Our government from the top down is trying to silence any talk about Muslim Brotherhood effects of what's going on in our nation right now. Thank you.
And Bob Marshall.
I authored a statute which set up the Virginia Commission on Immigration to look at all sides of this issue, legal, illegal, nice, bad, whatever. The appointees to this commission included an individual who was exceptionally hostile to the State of Israel and who had affiliations with the Muslim Brotherhood. Delegate Gilbert and I talked about this. We brought this to the attention of Governor Kane. He asked him to leave the commission because I did not think this individual would be fair and unbiased. We had him replaced. That's my experience. When I see a threat, when I see something that I think is not fair, I will speak up. It doesn't matter who, what's going on, I will stand up for the values that we have from our Constitution, which come from our Creator.
Do you, more specifically, do you believe that the Muslim Brotherhood is a threat in Virginia and that Grover Norquist is part of that situation?
I don't know about Grover, but I know that Muslim Brotherhood, I haven't read the book yet, but we got him off the commission because of his affiliations with the Muslim Brotherhood.
All right. We're only going to have time for a couple of more questions probably from the audience because I know some people have to get out of here at 4 o'clock and we're still going to need to do closing statements. But
350.
for closing statements? Right.
Hello, my name is Jared Taylor and I'm from Oakton. And until 1965, we had an immigration policy that ensured that most immigrants were from Europe. Now that changed in 1965 and now we have immigrants from all around the world. The largest number that have come now are Hispanics. And according to the Census Bureau, Hispanics are expected to be an outright majority in this country by about 2065. And they're looking forward to that, of course, increasing numbers and increasing influence. I'll get to a question. My question for you is, why is it considered good, healthy ethnic pride for them to look forward to the power that comes with majority status, whereas it would be considered wrong and racist for whites to be concerned about an immigration policy that is reducing them to a minority?
We believe we can begin with you, Rob.
Thanks. That was an easy question. I think America is a land of opportunity and freedom, and I think immigrants, many of whom come here legally and obeying the rule of law, should have, all the benefits of our great country. I'm not really concerned about different groups, Hispanics having a majority status, as long as everybody coming is following the law. We can't give exemptions to people that break the law and then give them amnesty, and I'm absolutely opposed to amnesty of any sort. We need to secure the borders and take this step by step, and I think that's really the only way to tackle this problem.
Stephen Hollingshead.
I agree that our immigration policy should be colorblind.
You think it makes no difference where they come from?
No, I don't think it makes a difference where they come from. I think it makes a difference. It's a rule of law issue, right? If they follow the law. And we have plenty of laws that aren't being enforced on this issue and need to be enforced when folks are arrested for other crimes and then not deported. If that's a problem. But no, I think that our law should be colorblind. There's a reason that Lady Justice, she wears a blindfold.
Howie Lind.
Let's be brutally honest. Why hasn't the immigration system been fixed? Republicans, i.e. chambers of commerce, big business, they want cheap labor. Democrats want votes, so therefore there's no political will to fix this. This week I was knocking on doors in Sterling, knocked on a man's door, gave him my little intro, and he shut the door and he came out and he stood there for 15 minutes chewing my ear off about the fact that he has been a small business owner for many, many years, landscaping business, but was basically shut down, put out of business because he was playing by the rules. He was bidding on all the contracts with legal people, as opposed to a lot of his competition that had illegals. He was outbid on all of them. He said he's pointing his finger at me. Nobody talks about it. Why don't anybody talk about that? I said, well, that's a great point. I'll talk about it. But to your point, I'm colorblind. I'm not saying which segments should come here or not, but I'm, again, strong favorite. The strongest proponents of legal immigration are the people that came here playing by the rules. Thank you.
Bob Marshall.
In the 1970s, when both my wife and I worked for Congressman Bob Dornan, Kathy was a caseworker. She dealt with the INS. The rule at that time was you could come to the United States if you had a job, and you had to have relatives here to back you up in case you lost the job. I am more concerned, and I think we should return to that, I am more concerned about the values that are held by immigrants rather than the country of origin. If you can, believe that there's a God who is a creator who gives us rights, and rights don't come from government. You can come from Nigeria, you can come from Bolivia, you could even come from the Soviet Union. We have immigrants from, well, it's not the Soviet Union anymore. You have to have the values rather than the geography or the individual racial background.
70% vote Democrat. That's how unless you get up with all of them. Talk about how you want to change This is crazy.
Well, but it becomes a complex issue right at that point, doesn't it? 70% of 10% of the vote, and perhaps evolving, and George W. Bush had a much larger percentage of the Hispanic vote than succeeding Republican candidates. And also, you're dealing with a population coming from Latin America that is largely Christian, religious, family-oriented, work ethic. Well, and then there's the rub.
Let's go to the next one. Thank you.
Let me see. I think we've got time for one more question before we get on to closing statements.
Hey, Chris, could we do 30-second responses and have them answer in 30 seconds?
I didn't get a chance to answer the last question.
30 seconds.
My apologies.
That's okay. I still think it's rigged. You know, again, I want to emphasize, as far as amnesty is concerned, I'm completely opposed to amnesty. I mentioned before about 3 million illegal immigrants being given amnesty back in 1986. If we were to do it today, the estimates are it would cost somewhere around $6.3 trillion it would cost this country if we did that. We also have an underground economy. We have to get this under control. We need to go back to basics because we have a $2 trillion underground economy that is destroying this country. It's robbing us of not only income that we need, it's also robbing us of jobs. So this is something that we need to make first order. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question from the audience.
Mark Sell from Leesburg, and I missed the early portion of this debate, so if my question is redundant, feel free to disregard it. But my question concerns the NSA and the surveillance state. Basically, would you support and sponsor legislation that would prohibit the federal government from conducting and I say the federal government, not just the NSA, from conducting the kind of surveillance that the NSA has conducted, the mass gathering of data and all that stuff, without a warrant? Thank you.
And I believe we start with Steve Hollingshead.
Absolutely, yes. You know, the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution says that people have the right to be secure in their homes and, you know, their papers, their effects, and their persons, right? And so, hey, I used to run an enforcement agency of the United States government. I'm all for going after bad guys. You need to get a warrant. There's nothing wrong with pursuing criminals, but the whole idea that we can collect information on everybody in case someday we're going to need it, the way, you know, Obama's executive order, not only does the NSA track your phone calls, but now he ordered Homeland Security to use local traffic cameras to tap in and keep track of where your car has been. Now, why do they want to know that? I mean, it's just, you know, I mean, they need to get a warrant if they're going after bad guys, and I absolutely would sponsor legislation to overrule those executive orders, but also just more broadly to say, if you're going after bad guys, great, get a warrant in a real court. Otherwise, don't collect the information.
Howie Lind.
Great question, Mark, wherever you went. We did talk about that a little earlier, and I said, yes, indeed, we need to rein in the NSA. I fully support Senator Rand Paul's lawsuit, which is being done by Ken Cuccinelli to violation of the Fourth Amendment against the U.S. government, so I'm fully in favor of that. Thank you.
Bob Marshall.
I did put a study in this year in the General Assembly that I didn't get it passed, but I was calling to the attention of my colleagues. We are a sovereign. The NSA has no right to take the phone records of a fellow sovereign. I thought there should have been a lawsuit at that time, but there wasn't. I got the law passed this year that says no tracking of your cell phone or your computer. I joined what we formed a privacy caucus in the General Assembly. One of the problems is that members of the Intelligence Oversight Committee in the House and Senate are subject to what would otherwise be known as blackmail in different circles. What am I talking about? They get about $3.7 million in donations from the corporations that have contracts with the NSA. Regularly, and I was up on the Hill in the early 70s working for a conservative Democrat, the FBI and some other intelligence agencies would go around to congressional offices with manila folders with information there. They'd place it on the desk. Nothing was said. Nothing was said at all. The congressman or the senator would turn the pages. They'd even be told that, well, you know, the FBI, we've collected information, we can't get rid of it. Underworld information about U.S. senators was there. Nothing was said. They became very docile. Nobody can blackmail me. I have a background. It's clean. I don't mind getting in fights.
Mark Seven.
I don't know where Mark Sell went, but the answer is yes, and I would take it a step further. It's not just NSA that's doing this to us. We have other... I'm sorry? Well, the Federal Reserve, through the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, this is the new agency that was created out of the Dodd-Frank Act. And just about everybody in this room, if you have a mortgage, a credit card, a car payment, they have your personal information. This is not in the aggregate. This is individually. They know who your bank is that you have a credit card with. They know exactly what your spending limits are. They know exactly where you spend your money. This is scary, folks. This is the United States of America. We don't do this. This is not Russia. This is not a communist country. This is the United States. But this is what we're turning into because we have a president that wants everybody to like us. He criticized President Bush for the things that he did. President Bush, I think, followed the law. And even if he didn't, he's a Boy Scout compared to Barack Obama. Thank you.
And just since you mentioned the Soviet Union, this isn't the Soviet Union. I don't know if you saw the piece in Washingtonian magazine profiling Jay Carney, the White House spokesman, at his home with the wife and kids on the Soviet propaganda posters. With the wife and kids on two Soviet propaganda I kid you, I'm not making this up. The two Soviet propaganda posters, full-sized posters on the walls in the kitchen. Well, the kids are flipping eggs. I'm sorry, I digress.
That was just recently.
It's the brand new magazine,
right.
Yeah. Rob Wasinger.
Thank you. Yes, I'd absolutely support legislation to get the NSA under control. I think, I agree with pretty much everybody up here. It's been a complete outrage to have the federal government spying on us in the way that they are. Rand Paul's doing a great job. I join with Congressman Justin Amash as well in his fight to protect our privacy. Thank you.
All right. And now it's time for closing statements by the candidates. And if you could keep it to a minute, it would be appreciated. I think I may just go down the line from the far end to here, starting with Mr. Stephen Hollingsted.
Well, thank you all for coming and spending time doing this today. You're here because you're leaders in the conservative movement. You folks are the key to victory. Now, which candidate up here has the best chance to beat lobbyist, green energy advocate Barbara Comstock on the 26th, and the best chance to beat Obamacare proponent John Faust on November 4th? He also loves the EPA. I think I'm that candidate because of my business experience, because of my experience fighting waste, fraud, and abuse in the government, and because of my experience teaching the Constitution of the United States. So please, go to my website, hollingshead.com, and sign up to volunteer. We've got a lot of momentum. We need your help making calls. So go there and do that, and then vote for me on April 26th, and together we'll go across that river and we'll stand up to the Washington establishment, to the career politicians of both parties, and to Barack Obama, and we'll make them stop it. Thank you.
Howie Lind.
Well, yes, thank you all for being here on this beautiful weekend, sitting inside an auditorium like this. It's great you're all here. Conservatism, yes, it's strong in this country. We are demoralized sometimes, but not right now. I'll just end where I started, where what we have going on in this race right now is the absent chair there is the establishment candidate, all right? Which one of us can beat her? I believe that my race right now, the way we're positioned, taking her, not just her, but the whole establishment in Virginia and in Washington on Medicaid expansion in Richmond, which is part of Obamacare, and then calling her out on her Barack Obama vote in 2008, which, why in the world would anybody, certainly in this room and beyond, vote for him? We don't know. But we're going to take her to task, and the challenge is there. So please, again, I'm the only military veteran in this race. National defense is very strong for me, but it's across the board, all these issues. Please visit my website at howielin.com. I ask for your vote on April 26th. Thank you all very much.
Delegate Bob Marshall.
Thank you, Chris. I win in Democrat districts. Barack Obama won my district by 11%. How do I do that? I can get bills passed that the ACLU and John Birch Society will both support. That's how I win. I've been outspent 4-1 at times. I do not compromise on moral issues. About 20 years ago, Bill Howe wanted me to cut a moral issue in half. I couldn't do it. I said, you can move a road here 100 feet, move it over there 200 feet, but I will not abandon moral issues. I'll focus them more narrowly, but I do not give up on them. I talked to Jim Gilmore in the late 1990s, urged him to appoint a Democrat delegate to a job so we could get to a tie position in the House of Delegates. He did appoint that guy. We did get to the tie position. The Democrats refused to seat our 3 members. I had the floor taken from me. We had planned a parliamentary filibuster. I was on the floor. The floor was taken from me. The Democrats recessed. They came back. The chairman said, "We're not recognizing you." I said, "You're not taking the floor from me." I said 150 times, "Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman." I started to say, "Objection, objection, objection." Within 3 minutes, every Republican stood up demanding that we stop this stealing right here. I eventually got, 3 days later, I can't see down there. I'm dyslexic. 3 days later, 3 days later, the Republican Party was resurrected. We had equal power, and from that time on, we've been in the ascendancy. Unfortunately, the Republicans are abandoning their principles.
So if you're dyslexic, what does that sign say?
More time. More time.
Mark 7.
He didn't take my time, did he?
No.
Okay.
No.
I took Barbara. She wasn't here.
Well, we've all taken. Well, actually, I haven't. Most of them have taken a pot shot at Barbara here tonight. This isn't about Barbara. This is about all of us, meaning you. This is about the future of our country. This is about the future of the United States Congress. As I said in my opening remarks, we have a lot of problems there. Everybody in this room, I guarantee, has said at one time or another, let's throw them all out. We've all said it. Everybody up here has said it. And we've said that for a reason. We keep sending the same type of people to Washington every 2 years, people that have been in state legislatures, people that have been in government. We keep sending the same type of people. We have to break the mold. We need to send somebody from Main Street, the people that have been the most affected, the middle class, by what's coming out of Washington. The added benefit that I have besides that is that I have 15 years of experience in Washington, a seat at the table, testifying before Congress, defending you, even on the local level in different states. I'm dyslexic as well. I'm reclaiming some of his time.
It's catchy.
I know. I have actually co-authored 2 state bills, 2 different, West Virginia and South Dakota, that have cut taxes for small business. I have sued the Federal Reserve Board myself because they were going after small business. I have already proven, when you send somebody to Washington, you have to wonder what they're going to do when they get there. Is this person going to live up to what they promised us? You don't have to look that far with me because I've already been doing it for 15 years, and I promise you, and I've put it in writing, that I will continue to do it, and I will term limit myself so I don't become one of the career politicians in Washington. Thank you very much.
Right. We were going to have to term limit you here in a minute. And Rob Wasinger.
Thank you. It's starting to sound like a filibuster over here. Since 2010, we have elected a lot of new leadership all across this country. In fact, about 55% of the House Republican caucus have been elected in those cycles. That means we're on the cusp of really taking over the House and doing something meaningful, getting rid of Boehner, getting a real conservative in. And that's the choice that we have right now. We can go with a conservative or an establishment politician. We should be joining the revolution. It's happening all across the country. And the people that I mentioned before, people like Rand Paul, fighting and protecting our privacy, Scott Walker, Tom Coburn, Justin Amash, Mark Meadows, Trey Gowdy. These guys are out there taking the fight, and we have a chance to put somebody in Congress that's going to join their ranks. So we all need to keep calm as we make this decision and join the revolution. Vote Wasinger on April 26th.
Ladies and gentlemen, that pretty much concludes our Republican congressional candidates debate for the 10th Virginia District. And I'm very envious. I live in the District of Columbia. I'm represented by a non-voting delegate by the name of Eleanor Holmes Norton. At least she's non-voting.
That's right.
And you guys have a really great crop of people to choose from. I don't necessarily envy the decision, but I think you're going to be in good hands no matter which way it comes down, provided, of course, one of these gentlemen win the general election.
Okay. You got your gun. You got your guns, though, right? You're able to keep your guns in
Yeah,
DC,
well,
right?
now we have guns and everything. Yeah, now we've got kind of a heavily restricted Second Amendment in the District of Columbia. But I want to thank the candidates, Rob Wasinger, Mark Savitt, Delegate Bob Marshall, Howie Lind, and Stephen Hollingshead for participating in this. And as I said, it's the most beautiful day we've had in about 8 months. So it's great that so many people showed up to participate in our sacred democratic process. And thank all of you. And somebody will see you all again on Election Day.
Stay like this.
Okay.
All right, please let me keep your attention for a second. This is probably the most important piece of information that we have to share with you. You might want a pen. I have never in my life seen a more complicated voting process for you for this coming primary.
Oh, right.
So if you walk out of here and you don't listen to me, even if you want to, you might not be able to figure out how to vote. So this is how it's going to go. It's on a Saturday. It's on April 26th. It's only from 10 to 3. That's it. 10 to 3, Saturday, April 26th. You cannot vote where you normally vote. Do you know that? You cannot vote where you normally vote. You're going to have to go to vagop10.org, which I tried 4 times yesterday, and it wouldn't even come up. So good luck with that.
Don't worry, it's at hollingshead.com as well.
These guys all have websites, and I'm sure they have active ones that actually work. And you'll have to figure out what your precinct is, and then you have to figure out where your voting location is. But it is not where you normally go. Okay, you got all that? So what's the date?
26.
What time?
10 to 3.
All right. Okay, now the other thing is, that's not all. As if that weren't complicated enough, you have to print out a statement of intent and fill it out and take it with you. And then take a photo ID. Now that part we could do.
I was going to say, as long as you don't have a photo ID.
All right, so did you get all that seriously? You understand? The hurdles are amazing. I think somebody needs to look into that. New congressman, whoever you might be. All right, so that's it. I just want to say, someone else said this to me before I came up here. I wish all of you could serve. What a great group of candidates. Let's give them a hand. And last but not least, Chris, you're marvelous, and we thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon from your best girl with us. Thank you. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you.
Easy.